Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to sift through a pile of research, articles, notes, basically all the raw material, and pull out the really key stuff for you. The idea is simple, get you informed, maybe surprise you with a few facts, and hopefully keep it interesting along the way. Today, we're diving into this, well, incredibly tangled web of global shifts. Imagine a giant chessboard, right? But the pieces are economies, populations, even technology itself. We'll be looking at how trade tools suddenly became, diplomatic weapons, how the big players are reacting, and these huge demographic changes happening almost silently in the background.
It really is a fascinating picture right now. Economic policy, it's not just about growth charts anymore, is it? It's very much about power, about influence. We'll try to connect the dots for you, Washington, Beijing, New Delhi, Africa, and unpack the thinking behind these big global moves.
Okay, let's get into it then. Let's unpack the material and see if we can find those aha moments where it all clicks together.
Tariffs, from economic tools to geopolitical weapons.
Right. Let's start with something that sounds a bit dry, tariffs. But they've really become more like a relationship ultimatum, haven't they? Less economics textbook, more geopolitical power play. What's really changed?
That's a good way to put it. We saw this very clearly with the second Trump administration starting in January 2025. Right away, a pledge to overhaul our trade system. And then almost immediately, by February 1st, these national emergencies were declared, the justification. Fentanyl trafficking.
Okay.
And that declaration, using the IEUPA, became the basis for these broad tariffs, 25% on most goods from Mexico and Canada, 10% on China initially.
But the Mexico and Canada ones didn't stick.
Well, the ones specifically on USMCA-compliant goods got suspended quickly. But interestingly, the fentanyl tariff on Chinese goods, that actually went up to 20% by early March.
Yeah.
So, you see, it wasn't just about balancing trade figures. It was using economic pressure for, well, other stated goals, like fentanyl.
And it didn't stop just there, right? This idea of secondary tariffs came up. That sounds like a major step up.
Oh, definitely. Threatening a 25% tariff on other countries just for buying Venezuelan oil? That's a big shift from a simple U.S.-China dispute.
Right.
And then there was the move against the de minimis exemption. That's the loophole, basically, that let tons of low-value packages, often from China, come into the U.S. duty-free.
Ah, yeah, I've heard about that. Like stuff you order online.
Exactly. Slating that to end by July 2025 wasn't just tweaking customs rules. It signaled a much bigger plan to control what comes in and from where.
So the U.S. is throwing these economic punches.
Yeah.
How did the rest of the world, especially allies like Europe, take it?
Well, Europe initially vowed to fight back. The EU had countermeasures ready, potential tariffs on everything from American almonds to yachts. They even talk about taxing U.S. tech giants.
So a trade war was brewing.
It looked that way.
Yeah.
But they also showed some flexibility, a willingness to maybe delay some retaliations. They were hoping to avoid an all-out tariff war, perhaps deepen U.S.-EU trade deals instead. It's a balancing act, you know. What was really curious, though, was Russia, conspicuously absent from this new list of Trump tariffs.
Yeah, that seems odd given, well, everything. Ukraine, the existing sanctions.
Exactly. It definitely raised some questions about the strategic calculus behind it all.
So all this uncertainty, what does it actually do to the global economy? What are the forecasts looking like?
Not great, frankly. The World Bank slashed its forecast for global trade growth. They're now expecting it to slow way down to just 1.8% in 2025. That's a huge downgrade.
Wow.
And overall global growth, expected to hit 2.3% in 2025. That'd be the slowest since 2008 if you exclude the big recession years like 2009 and 2020.
So what's driving that slowdown? Just the tariffs?
It's largely blamed on this surge in trade barriers, yes, but also just the sheer level of policy uncertainty. It makes businesses hesitant. They even modeled a scenario, just a 10 percentage point hike in U.S. tariffs, with others retaliating proportionally. That alone could shave half a percentage point off global growth in 2025.
0.5%, that's massive on a global scale.
It really is. It shows how these tools, once just for trade tweaks, are now fundamentally shaking the whole global economic structure.
The global response, China, India, and the BRICS group chat.
Okay, so tariffs are flying, the global economy is getting shaky. How are the other big players, particularly giants like China and India, dealing with all this?
Right, let's look at China first. Despite all the friction with the U.S., their focus seems very much on potential rivals, especially India. There's apparently a real consensus within Chinese strategic circles to actively discourage their own companies from investing too heavily or setting up whole supply chains in India.
Really? discouraging their own companies.
Yeah. They're even reportedly framing India as, like, a graveyard for foreign enterprises or a walled fortress in their internal messaging.
Wow, that's blunt.
It is. The fear seems to be that India could genuinely become the next world factory, especially if Western countries continue trying to de-risk from China. It's clear economic rivalry.
But haven't the U.S. and China tried to, make deals like that Phase 1 agreement?
They did try. China made some big commitments under Phase 1, particularly on buying U.S. agricultural goods, aiming for at least $40 billion a year on average for 2020-2022.
And did they meet that?
Nope. Fell significantly short. They only managed about 73% of the total $80 billion target over those years.
So the agreements are one thing, the reality is another.
It really highlights how tough it is to enforce these deals when the underlying geopolitical tensions are so high.
Okay, so that's China. What about India? They have this long history of non-alignment. How are they playing this? It sounds like what you called strategic autonomy.
Exactly. Strategic autonomy for India isn't just passive non-alignment, it's a very active foreign policy choice. Look at the Ukraine war. India didn't directly criticize Russia, partly because they rely on Russian military kit, but they consistently spoke up for sovereignty, territorial integrity. They even told Russia privately to back off from the war.
So maintaining their principles, but also their relationship.
Precisely. And when Trump tried using tariff threats as, economic coercion, trying to dictate India's foreign policy, even offering to mediate on Kashmir,
Okay, remember that.
India, as the source material puts it, was not easily bullied. They didn't buckle under the pressure.
So instead of caving, India actually shifted.
That's what the analysis suggests. Trump's approach, especially his gestures towards Pakistan, kind of backfired. It seems to have pushed India to recalibrate, moving a bit closer to Russia, actually, and improving some limited coordination with China.
Interesting. So the pressure had the opposite effect intended for the U.S.-India relationship.
It looks that way. A potential setback for years of effort to build that strong India-U.S. partnership shows how easily miscalculations can happen in this environment.
And then there's BRICS. It started as an economic acronym, but now it feels more like, well, like you said, the world's new group chat, maybe offering an alternative.
Yeah, the BRICS group chat. Now with 11 members, it's definitely a significant political grouping. It aims to be a counterweight to Western-led institutions.
But are they unified?
Not entirely. There are internal divisions, quite significant ones, especially over things like Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Their trade ties have grown, yes, but look closely, and it's still very China-centric. And this talk of de-dollarization...
Yeah, is a BRICS currency going to happen?
Highly unlikely, according to the sources. The main goal seems to be boosting trade and investment using their own local currencies, not creating some new supranational one. China's capital controls alone make a single currency pretty unrealistic right now. It's more about creating options, alternative pathways, rather than replacing the whole system yet.
East versus West, competing visions of the world order.
Listening to this, it really feels like we're seeing two fundamentally different approaches to how the world should work playing out. A kind of West versus East vision, maybe. They seem quite distinct.
That's a very good way to frame it. And it's fascinating how these different visions are articulated and pushed forward. If you look at the Western perspective, particularly the U.S., the narrative often focuses on combating unfair trade practices. Think Chinese subsidies, IP theft, now fentanyl trafficking.
Right, that's the language we hear.
And leaders like President Biden tend to talk about an open world. The emphasis is on cooperation, multilateralism, shared rules for things like the internet, AI. It's about working together, mostly through the established international systems.
Okay, an open world vision.
Yeah.
How does that translate into practice with tricky relationships? Like, say, the U.S. and Israel. That's always complex.
Extremely complex. It really tests that open world idea.
Yeah.
The U.S. provides huge amounts of aid, military and economic, making it an unusual partnership, as one source calls it. But there are deep tensions. Disagreements over Israeli settlements in East Jerusalem, for example, which the U.S. officially considers occupied territory.
So the U.S. tries to balance its interests.
It tries. But it's often accused of, well, sometimes sacrificing democratic principles in the Middle East for the sake of stability or its own strategic goals. And speaking of testing the Western vision, look at the sanctions on Russia over Ukraine. They were called unprecedented, hitting over 70% of Russian banking assets, cutting off billions.
A massive economic blow.
Absolutely. Yet Russia adapted. It shifted to a war economy. It shows there are limits to how much economic pressure alone can achieve against a determined state.
Okay, so that's the Western open world approach with its complexities. How does the approach from the East, particularly China, differ?
China offers a distinctly different vision. It's often described as Westphalian.
Westphalian. Like the treaty.
Exactly. Hark back to that idea of absolute state sovereignty. The emphasis is on the primacy of the state, non-interference in internal affairs, territorial integrity.
So less focus on shared global rules, more on national power.
Pretty much. The goal seems to be diminishing U.S. influence and maximizing China's own freedom to act. The idea is that a state's global influence should match its capabilities, its power. You see this in President Xi Jinping's speeches too, especially on tech like AI. It's more of a closed world narrative, prioritizing national security, sovereignty, and strategic competition over open global cooperation. Self-reliance is key.
And how does this East-West dynamic play out in volatile regions like the Middle East, beyond just the U.S.-Israel piece?
The Middle East is a perfect example of these competing visions, intersecting with long-standing local rivalries and sectarian divides. Take Iran. It's built up significant influence by supporting proxy groups, militias and allies in Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen, mostly Shia groups.
Creating its own sphere of influence.
Right. And the ongoing conflict between Iran and Israel, while maybe not directly hitting oil fields yet, still creates huge risks for global energy security. It raises tensions across the region, threatens key shipping lanes like Hormuz and Bab el-Mandab, and all that instability. It creates space for extremist groups to exploit the chaos.
It's a real powder keg. What about North Korea in all this? They seem to play by their own rulebook entirely.
Completely. Kim Yo-jong, the deputy director of propaganda, and Kim Jong-un's sister, stated very clearly that North Korea has no will to improve relations with South Korea. She even said this stance will be fixed in our constitution. They're doubling down on isolation, even rejecting gestures from the South.
So neither the open nor closed world visions seem to apply easily there.
Not really.
Yeah.
It highlights the limits of both approaches when faced with such entrenched ideology. The U.S. position is still firm. North Korea cannot possess nuclear weapons. But the material suggests any breakthrough might need direct, perhaps unconventional leadership, like another Trump initiative. It's a major challenge to any idea of a stable world order.
Economic currents navigating global uncertainty.
Okay, we've mapped out the big geopolitical shifts, the competing visions. But what's happening underneath all that? What about actual economic growth, development, especially with all this policy uncertainty swirling around? It feels precarious.
Precarious is a good word. The outlook for global growth has definitely substantially weakened just since the start of the year. Like we touched on, the forecast for 2025 is now just 2.3% global growth. That's really slow, the slowest since 2008 if you ignore the actual global recessions of '09 and '20. And this slowdown isn't just in one or two places, it's pretty broad-based.
What are the main things dragging it down? Is it just the trade stuff we discussed?
That's a big part of it. The sources point to high and persistent policy uncertainty, especially around trade. That makes businesses nervous about investing, it slows down trade flows, it dampens confidence generally. And specific economies face headwinds too. China, for example, is expected to slow down over the next few years. Any boost from government spending is likely to fade, potential growth is slowing, and that property sector downturn could still get worse, causing ripples everywhere.
Right. And what about the emerging and developing economies? They're often the ones hit hardest when the global economy slows.
Yeah, that's a major concern. Growth in those EMDEs, as they're called, is projected to slow to 3.8% in 2025.
Which sounds okay, but
But it's just insufficient, according to the analysis. It's not enough to close the income gap with richer countries, it's not enough to create the jobs needed for growing populations, and it won't make a big dent in extreme poverty. Many face this looming jobs challenge population growing faster than employment opportunities.
and investment isn't flowing in either.
Less than it used to. Foreign direct investment FDI into these economies has been weakening steadily since the 2008 crisis. It peaked near 5% of their GDP. Now it's hovering around 2%.
That's a big drop.
It is, and FDI is crucial. It brings capital, technology, jobs. But frankly, many EMDEs still have more restrictive investment rules than advanced economies, which doesn't help attract that money.
Are there specific regions really feeling this economic pressure more than others?
Absolutely. Low-income countries, the poorest ones, are projected to grow slower than their recent average. And a worrying stat, about 70% of them are either in debt distress or at high risk of it.
70%. Wow.
Yeah. In Europe and Central Asia, forecasts got downgraded for almost 3/4 of the economies there, citing trade tensions and uncertainty. Though, on a positive note, some countries like the Baltics and Poland have successfully pivoted away from Russian energy, mostly using global LNG now.
Okay. What about Latin America?
Also feeling it. Mexico is seen as most directly affected by those U.S. tariffs on goods that don't comply with the USMCA trade deal. That apparently hits about half of its exports to the U.S.
Ouch. And Africa.
Sub-Saharan Africa's growth is also looking weaker than previously expected. Income gains per person are described as inadequate for poverty reduction. And demographically, it faces the biggest jobs challenge of any region. Just not enough jobs for the number of young people entering the workforce.
The shifting sands of demographics and AI's looming presence.
It's easy to get caught up in the trade wars and economic forecasts. They dominate the news. But there are these deeper, slower-moving currents like global demographics. And this is where things get, well, genuinely mind-bending.
Oh, absolutely jaw-dropping. Demographers are seeing this unexpected acceleration in the decline of fertility rates, almost everywhere. Think about this. Mexico City's current birth trends suggest women there will have, on average, less than one baby in their lifetime. Less than one. Thailand is down to about one. Even Kolkata, in India, which you might imagine differently, is now at one birth per woman.
That's incredible, because for a population to stay stable, you
We
need...
need a little bit over two. Not just two, because sadly, not everyone survives to have children. So rates of one or less. That means rapid population decline is baked in for those places. Though it's always important to remember these are projections, conditional scenarios. Predicting population precisely is notoriously difficult.
Still, that global trend is striking, but it's not uniform across the globe, is it? Particularly the contrast between Africa and parts of Asia.
No, it's definitely not uniform. Africa really stands out. It's described as the last really high fertility bastion that's undergoing this dramatic youth explosion. The median age there was just 19 in 2024. 19. And even by 2050, it's only projected to reach 24. So Africa, along with South Asia, is where almost all the growth in the world's working-age population will come from in the coming decades.
And compare that to Europe or North America.
Stark contrast. Europe and North America are looking at median ages over 40 by 2030. They're grappling with declining workforces, aging populations. Asia is more mixed, but the overall trend is slowing growth. South Asia's median age is projected to jump from 27 now to 40 by 2050. Other parts of Asia also face shrinking workforces. These are huge fundamental shifts.
So you have these massive demographic waves living in different directions, and then you throw in AI, which feels like, I don't know, that overachieving intern who wants everyone's job, as the notes playfully put it. How is AI factoring into global power?
That's a good analogy. Yes, the intensifying tech race between the U.S. and China, especially around AI, is absolutely reshaping global power dynamics. And again, you see those competing narratives. Leaders like Biden and Xi strategically use different language about AI.
The open versus closed world again.
Exactly. Biden's speeches often frame AI through that open world lens cooperation, setting global standards together, multilateral governance, Xi Jinping's speeches, much more closed world. The focus is on security, national sovereignty, using AI for power competition, ensuring state control.
So the narratives aren't just talk, they reflect actual strategic goals.
Precisely. They reflect and shape policy decisions. It shows just how central AI has become to this shifting geopolitical landscape. It's not just technology. It's a core element of national power now. Outro.
Okay, so wrapping this up, what's the big takeaway? We've gone from tariffs acting like weapons to India's balancing act, these competing East-West visions, economic headwinds, and these staggering demographic shifts. It really highlights how connected everything is, doesn't it? Seemingly separate issues are all tangled together.
Absolutely. This deep dive really shows a world where those old lines between economics, geopolitics, technology, even social trends like birth rates, they're just getting blurrier and blurrier. Understanding these connections, these dynamics, it isn't just academic. It feels pretty crucial for figuring out what might come next.
Right. And maybe something for you, the listener, to chew on until our next deep dive is this. Think about those incredibly different demographic paths we just talked about. Africa booming with young people, Europe aging rapidly. How does that massive divergence intersect with the ongoing trade wars and the AI race between powers like the US and China? Is sheer population growth going to create new centers of economic and political gravity? Or can technological leadership like an AI allow nations to overcome the challenges of a shrinking workforce? Which force wins out? Something to think about.